Well, first off, United Nations is demanding accountability and justice for a double strike on a Gaza hospital that killed health workers and journalists as Israel released the findings of an initial inquiry into the attack. Israel's back-to-back strikes on the Nasser hospital on Monday killed at least 20 people, including health workers, journalists and emergency first responders, and prompted international outrage from press groups, medical organizations and national governments. The Israel Defense Forces, IDF, said its initial inquiry found that troops from the Golani Brigade operating in Khan Yunis had identified a camera positioned by Hamas in the area of the Nasser hospital that was being used to observe the activity of IDF troops in order to direct terrorist activities against them. Well, Israel did not offer evidence for its claim, nor did it explain why the first strike was followed by a second one minutes later. The location is regularly used by reporters and news outlets for live streaming. Meanwhile, the Israeli military has continued its operations around Gaza City. The Israeli military said its troops were operating on the outskirts of Gaza City to locate and dismantle terror infrastructure sites above and below ground. Residents of the Zaytun neighborhood of the city spoke of heavy Israeli bombardment overnight. Following the cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remained vague about the government's intentions as Israeli media reported the meeting had been inconclusive.
We have just come from a cabinet meeting. I don't think I can elaborate too much, but I will say one thing: it started in Gaza, and it will end in Gaza. We will not leave those monsters there. We will free all our hostages. We will ensure that Gaza will no longer constitute a threat to Israel.
As pressure builds up on Israel to wrap up its offensive, Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff said the U.S. president will host top officials of the White House on Wednesday to thrash out a detailed plan for post-war Gaza. Israel is under mounting pressure both at home and abroad to end its almost two-year campaign in Gaza, while the military is preparing to conquer the territory's largest city, and the United Nations has declared a famine. Mediators have circulated a draft ceasefire and hostage release deal, which has been accepted by Palestinian militant group Hamas, whose October 2023 attack triggered the devastating war. But Israel has yet to give an official response. Well, and to discuss this in detail, we have international affairs analyst Dr. Marek Laskiewicz joining us from London. Glad to have you join us, Marek. Right, well, you had Benjamin there saying that until Gaza is rid of Hamas, it started in Gaza, it will end in Gaza, and they'll make sure that they rid Gaza of Hamas. What do you make of his body language and then the language proper?
The central problem is that, of course, getting rid of Hamas of its various guises is impossible because Hamas is an idea, not a set of people. Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, feels very confident. He can do what he likes. Donald Trump has given him a carte blanche. The rest of the world could do nothing except condemn. And quite what he has in mind is unclear, because he says it will be rid of this problem. Well, how? Considering that it's an idea, Hamas actually encapsulates two ideas. One is, of course, that there's freedom from Israel, and the other is the conquering Israel. And it's the latter which is, of course, exercises the Israelis, and this is why they are attacking. But even so, even if Hamas were formally to declare itself finished, it would simply morph itself into a different group. So it's very hard to see how he intends to achieve it. But please note, it's very vague what he said, as you stated. And there has been, of course, the suggestions of ethnic cleansing. And so right now, it is obviously worrying precisely what he and the Israelis have in mind?
Talks, statements. UN says there must be accountability and justice for the double strike on the Gaza Nasser complex, the hospital. What further actions except talk can UN or anybody for that matter do to get Netanyahu to, stop this war on Gaza?
The UN is impotent. The rest of the world is impotent. That is the brutal fact. And as you rightly say, just talk and talk. Well, they can talk as much as they like. Israel has been ignoring UN resolutions and UN voting for years, explaining to itself that the rest of the world is simply being anti-Semitic, ignoring the fact that, of course, for example, the Gazans are Semites too. So in terms of anti-Semitism, Israel is conducting an anti-Semitic war in that sense. And here, the UN resolutions, which please note about the treatment of Palestinians, are going back 50 years now, and nothing happens. And therefore, I'm afraid the same thing is going to happen about the strike on journalists. It is quite significant that no proof is offered by Israel ever as to justifying its strikes. It minimates the sentence. It suffices for him to assert there's Hamas involved, and whether there is or isn't, no one can pursue the matter anyway. As for the camera, well, there are journalists there. And as far as I know, journalists use cameras, so it's by no means clear whether it was a Hamas camera. And when they're not just the journalist ones, he says it was a well-known journalist place for trying to survey what's going on. And I'm afraid, as far as it's going to be, it's just one more, if you like, questionable action by Israel that will remain without any punishment or any further investigation. IDF has more or less completed what it has to say. It's made its apology, which is, of course, meaningless to the victims, and that is that.
And then the IDF is claiming that there was a camera observing the actions of the IDF to launch a terrorist attack without evidence. What do you make of that statement? And then they had to launch the attack again. It was twice.
Well, the point is the camera could easily have been a journalist. It could have been a civilian. All they're saying is any camera can be also automatically deemed to be a Hamas camera. Why? They seem to think that terrorists are everywhere. What about journalists, for example? I mean, they were there. It was known that journalists were there. And so therefore, this excuse isn't actually full justification. How did they know it was Hamas? They assert, incidentally, there were Hamas operatives killed as well. Again, it's hard to see on what basis. The fact of the matter is that they can do what they like and do what they like. Equally, you have to cut, if you mention the settler violence against the Palestinians in the West Bank, or how many people get killed queuing up for food, the IDF does what it likes. And to be honest, it's just one more example of what is in effect almost target practice for them.
Yeah, the location is regularly used by reporters. That's what the news says, it's used by reporters, a news outlet, for live streaming. Do you wonder,
Yes.
Marek, whether could it just be that Israel is purposely targeting journalists? Because, you have 20 people, including health workers, journalists, and emergency first responders, were killed.
I'm afraid it is a possibility that has to be taken into account. The fact of the matter is many journalists have died. We're talking about roughly 200. We have to bear in mind the previous strike on journalists. We have to bear in mind that Israel permits no foreign journalists there. And so therefore, unfortunately, it must be said to be a possibility that the Hamas was merely a fig leaf of an excuse, and they were targeting the journalists so that the world cannot see what's really going on in Gaza. This is unfortunately a possibility which cannot be ruled out.
And then, of course, Special Envoy of Donald Trump, Steve Witkoff, said the U.S. president would host top officials at the White House on Wednesday, that is today, to thrash out a detailed plan for post-war Gaza. You said earlier that Trump has given Netanyahu carte blanche to go on and do what he wants. What do you make of this meeting?
The meeting is quite significant and, in fact, simply underlines what I stated. He has not said nothing about how Israel is conducting the war. merely that when Israel has crushed all resistance there, they're going to draw up plans for what will happen to the Gazans. Well, quite clearly, the Gazans may feel differently about their plans, which, incidentally, bearing in mind everything Israel has said, and in its way Donald Trump, it sounds fairly ominous, I would say, to the Gazans. Also, please note, the issue of hostages comes into it and so on, but in the sense that nothing is said about them either. The plan may well involve an attempt at ethnic cleansing, and it is possible that the destruction of Gaza, which we can see on the unfolding on the television cameras, is actually a part of trying to, if you like, persuade the Gazans to leave Palestine. There's nothing new about this. Golda Meir, many, many years ago, offered Palestinians money to leave, and so it really depends whether the Gazans have got the spirit to carry on with a very difficult situation.
And then the talk of mounting pressure, both at home and abroad. At home, particularly those who have their loved ones in the camp of Hamas as hostages. Do you think that Netanyahu will bow to this pressure?
Well, what is quite clear is Netanyahu will not bow to it for three reasons. Firstly, no amount of pressure can change his desire. He changed the Attorney General in Israel. He does what he likes, really. The Knesset is impotent. The protesters he just ignores. Sure, only Donald Trump, only the President of America has any sort of influence on him. Number two, the hostages. He has shown absolutely no concern about whether they live or die. I mean, the ones who are there now, because there has been a partial deal offered, and were he really genuinely concerned about the hostages, he would at least make a reply. He has simply ignored the whole point, which shows he's not really interested. And let us say the hostages are killed either in the war inadvertently by Israeli forces, which has happened, the IDF, or to stop them falling in Israeli hands, which has also happened. The fact of the matter is they'll simply blame it all on Hamas, and the hostages will be without their loved ones, and that will be that. Netanyahu really can see no link between his actions and anything that might happen to him. And short of impeachment, because he cannot be, please note, there has been attempts because he's facing corruption charges, but all of that is irrelevant. They can't, as long as he's prime minister, nothing's going to happen to him. And short of impeachment, nothing will. So all the protesters, all that's going on is irrelevant. And as far as one can see, he simply isn't interested in whether hostages live or die. And that's why he's making no reply to the offer to which Hamas has agreed, which is a pity, because at the very least he ought to reply.
I, at times, have had discussions with Israeli ambassador here in Nigeria, Michael Freeman, who was blaming, when I brought up the issue of the ceasefire that Hamas has accepted already, he was blaming Hamas. Who should be blamed? Is it the Israel Netanyahu-led cabinet, or Hamas that has accepted the deal, the Qatari-Egyptian deal put together by also, Witkoff was also involved?
Yes, I have seen the Israeli ambassador on your television, and he makes it quite clear that Hamas is responsible for everything, including any possibilities of famine, including Gaza being slowly destroyed. It's always Hamas's fault and nothing to do with Israel. Well, it is to do with Israel, as the rest of the world is saying, and unfortunately, a great deal of the blame is Israeli. Where there was wrong by Hamas is, of course, the initial attack, but secondly, they took quite some time to agree to this partial hostage deal, which is essentially the agreement that was proposed by the United States. Now here, there clearly is Hamas should be blamed for not arriving at this decision sooner, what is a very difficult situation. But having said that, it is now in Netanyahu's camp to agree or not, and so right now the blame can be put on Netanyahu, bearing in mind my previous comments.
Don't forget that they say it's better to be late than delayed. You and I will keep watching. I mean, you follow these events. The hope is that for the sake of the Palestinians who are in Gaza, who are not Hamas, and then of course there's a question of the journalist, and then aid not being allowed to get to where it's supposed to get to. We watch and see what gives. Thank you so much, International Affairs Analyst Dr. Marek Laskiewicz.